Since 1927, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has awarded the Oscar for Best Actor in a Leading Role 97 times to 86 actors, as of 2024, when we're recording this. The collective winners of the Best Actor Oscar are a who's who of Hollywood, legendary performers who have defined what acting and arguably even manhood looks like on screen. After debating the Best Film and Best Actress Oscar winners in previous episodes, for this Patreon-sponsored episode, the Great Pop Culture Debate now turns its attention to where the boys are, as we debate the best Oscar winners for Best Actor. My milkshake brought all the boys to the yard, but then they left. So I drank your milkshake to bring them all back. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. I'm your host, Eric Rezsnyak. Please welcome my panelists for this episode, all from the accounting firm of Fisher Price Waterhouse Cooper. First, that is a horse's head in your bed, but she's still happy to see you. It's Karissa Kloss.
Well, what can I say, Eric? You made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
I could never refuse you, godmother. Next, his name is Kevin Dillon, and he's here to recruit you.
Yes, I am a groomer.
I'm not that kind of groomer, folks.
No, Eric, a horse groomer.
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you, Kevin. And finally, please welcome our Patreon sponsor for this episode. We're so delighted to have him back. It's Steve Nikoloff.
I must be crazy to be in a loony bin like this again.
Well, I must confess, we are a pretty ratchet bunch, Steve. If you're curious about how we ended up with this Sweet 16, become a Patreon supporter of our show, or listen to the 3-minute primer available wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can head to this episode on greatpopculturedebate.com to find the listener bracket, as well as clips of all the nominated winning roles, so you can play along with us at home. With that out of the way, let's physically assault the presenter for a relatively benign joke about our wife and get into these debates. First up, the panel gave a unanimous victory to one-seed Anthony Hopkins, the 1991 winner for The Silence of the Lambs, which meant rough weather for 4-seed Dustin Hoffman, winner in 1988 for Rain Man. I do briefly want to speak about Dustin Hoffman here. This was his second, I believe, Best Actor Oscar after Kramer versus Kramer. This is a great performance. I mean, everyone loved him in Rain Man. This is one of those occasions where it was both a very popular movie and a very successful critical role. I just think it's one of those performances that in 2020s, playing characters who have disabilities or are differently abled does not track the way that it used to decades ago. Do we agree with that, Steve? Is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned this in the warm-up, but I think it's worth repeating on the main episode, which is that, when we're talking about the Oscars, the quote best of anything in a particular year is also really a snapshot of a time and a place where we were as a culture, globally, but also where moviedom was as a culture at that time. And I think that has a lot to do with how things age sometimes. And I think Rain Man is a great performance, but, we live in a different time. I mean, it's been almost 40 years almost since that performance. Some things age better than others, but that's what's difficult about the Oscars is we're not talking about the 16 best performances in movies of all time. We're talking about particular winners of a particular award at a particular time.
I think we can appreciate the work that went into the role, but I also think in a 2020s rubric, it doesn't stand up, especially against Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, which is to this day peerless. So we're sorry, Mr. Hoffman. We'll be moving Anthony Hopkins into round 2. Next, the majority of the panel prefers 3-seed Daniel Day-Lewis, winner from 2012 for There Will Be Blood, but Steve wants to keep it in the family with 2-seed Marlon Brando, winner in 1972 for The Godfather. Steve, look how we've massacred your boy. Defend Brando. Karissa, stop at nothing in your pursuit of money and power and victory for Day-Lewis. Steve, please go first.
I will go positive first and talk about Brando. Do I think this is his best performance ever? No. I do think that Marlon Brando in The Godfather is really excellently embodying quiet menace and profound wisdom and rage all at the same point in time. I think that, he's presenting a man, Vito Corleone, as someone who's both feared and respected, which is very different than what happens as the movie progresses with his successors, in the family. And he does all of this with a real deep sense of honor and loyalty, what he believes are honor and loyalty. And I think that he really turns Vito Corleone, who could be a real one-note character, into a multi-layered character, a multi-dimensional character who actually has different emotions and different ways of being. And he set up a new standard for some character depth in gangster films that didn't really exist prior to the 70s. So I think he really set a new benchmark for future performers in those kinds of roles. But I will also say, I'm going to get some flack for this. I hate There Will Be Blood. I hate that movie. I hate it so much.
Wild.
I think Daniel Day-Lewis as Daniel Plainview is portrayed ruthlessly and as a self-serving individual. He has no redeeming qualities, which fine. That's fine. You don't have to have redeeming qualities to give a good performance. But I think it makes it hard for the audience to connect with him emotionally in a way. For me, again, this is for me. I realize I'm in the minority here, but I also think that his "I'm an oil man" speech is supposed to be intimidating, but I honestly was almost laughing during that speech because it was almost farcical to me. I just think that he achieves a level in this movie. I've only seen it once or twice where I think they're trying to present it for its gravitas, and to me it came off almost cheesy. I just did not enjoy this performance.
No, and that's great. We this is why we have this podcast, right? We're all sharing our opinions, and everyone is entitled to set opinions. I'm not even saying yours is wrong, Steve. And I'm not just saying that because you're a Patreon sponsor. Karissa, you are one of the biggest Godfather fans I know. And we
I
have
know.
had many fights on this podcast about this movie. So I would
I
love
was so surprised by this, Karissa.
I was too.
I was, and not. I just like. I can't wait to hear this.
So has he swayed you at all? Are you sticking with Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood?
So this is the hardest matchup for me in this entire bracket. Even when I
I
got
think
to my
so.
final two, this was the hardest because I love both of these films. I've seen them both, I don't know, a dozen times probably. I love both of these actors just generally and also in these specific roles. So I had to really figure out what my rubric was going to be and how am I going to pick between these two. And one of the things I looked at was how much does the actor carry the film? Daniel Day-Lewis is in almost every single scene and shot of this movie. Marlon Brando in The Godfather is sort of known for only being in it like 15 minutes or something, right? He's only on screen like 15 minutes of that whole film. And we know that he is the overarching, he's the patriarch. It's what the film is named after him. However, yeah, There Will Be Blood. I think they both share a lot of other things. They're both infinitely quotable. The roles are played with kind of a calm fury. Day-Lewis is something else in this film. I think there's some magic between him and P.T. Anderson and what they do with this. So I have a feeling this is moving forward, so I don't want to say too much more about it.
I will just say this, though. I think it's really interesting in that argument that you make where you say he's only in the movie for 15 minutes when we just unanimously advance someone who's only in the movie for about 11.
But nope, I have a counter for this because I knew someone was going to bring this up, so I already thought of it. So Anthony Hopkins is the person I think of in Silence of the Lambs, regardless of time and length. When I think of The Godfather, I think of Al Pacino. I think of Robert Duvall. I think of James Caan. I think of the ensemble in that film. And that, for me, is one of the distinctions here. And that's why I move Hopkins forward and I don't move Brando forward, because to me, the Godfather movies, and this is why it was hard for them to win acting awards for those films, because they were truly ensemble films. You have young and old Vito winning the Oscars eventually for the Godfather movies. It's a great role. I am voting for Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood. So
for me, my rubric was number one, obviously, how was the performance? And I think these are both tremendous actors who give very good performances. Number two, what does this win say about this actor and their career specifically? And I do think there's a wonderful story specifically with Brando and this win. And then, of course, the chaos that surrounded him actually being bestowed the Oscar, which is a whole separate conversation. This particular matchup should be at least an Elite Eight, if not a Final Four matchup.
Yeah.
Is that when we're talking about these performances, in some ways, I'm glad they're paired up against one another, because these two men are kind of similar in their own ways. But whereas Brando is giving you a really kind of affected performance. Can we agree that that's a fair term here? I mean, there's a lot of affectations to his performance, right?
The chipmunk cheeks.
Cotton balls
With
in his
the
cotton
cotton
balls,
balls, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Whereas what Day-Lewis is giving you is something very plain. It is very 1920s Dust Bowl depression. And so to me, they're almost like total opposite approaches to two characters that are in fact very similar. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I
Yeah.
do think in terms of which one a performance,
Yeah.
I thought Day-Lewis was incredible. I was fascinated by him. Even when he's just silent and judging people, fascinated, hypnotized by him. We have kind of beaten a dead horse's head with this particular argument, but I love everything that's been said. It is 3 votes for Day-Lewis, so he will continue. I'm sorry, Steve. Next, it's actually a string of unanimous victories from our panel as 1 seed Gregory Peck, 1962 winner for To Kill a Mockingbird, impressed the jury over 4 seed Sean Penn, 2008 winner for Milk. 2 seed
Yep.
Cillian Murphy, 2024 winner for Oppenheimer, exploded the chances of 3 seed Tom Hanks, 1994 winner for Forrest Gump, and 4 seed F. Murray Abraham, 1984 winner for Amadeus, struck a major chord instead of 1 seed Tom Hanks, 1993 winner for Philadelphia. Rough round for Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
But that being said, our panelists did want to say a couple words about some of those people who got eliminated. And Steve, you wanted to say thanks to T. Hanks. What, you want to go first?
First of all, I love Tom Hanks. I think both as a person, I don't know him, but I enjoy his general demeanor. And I think he's great in a lot of stuff. He won back-to-back Oscars. Philadelphia and Forrest Gump were back-to-back. History has not been kind to Forrest Gump in a way that history has actually been much kinder to Pulp Fiction and The Shawshank Redemption, which were also both nominated for Best Picture that year. Do I think Forrest Gump should have won? And do I think Tom Hanks should have won? No, I really don't. I mean, my God, this movie won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Screenplay, was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. It was a moment for Forrest Gump. And the movie's hokey, but I actually think Tom Hanks does a good job of making what he could with what in other hands could have been a literal clown-like performance. He really does try to give that performance as much layering as he could. And so I think he deserves our respect.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I have nothing but respect for Tom Hanks. I think he's the modern day Jimmy Stewart. I really do. I think he's that everyman actor who's good in pretty much everything. He can elevate whatever he's in. And sorry to Tom Hanks if you're listening to this. We do love you. I'm sorry you got unanimously voted out both of your wins in round one. But Kevin, you wanted to say something about Sean Penn, who's also won several Oscars for Best Actor, specifically about his performance in Milk.
He is great in Milk, actually. I think, there's immense amounts of dialogue around straight actors playing gay, which I personally don't have a problem with, and most actors don't either. And I think Sean Penn only actually gives what I think is a very loving honor and tribute to Harvey Milk, kind of taking elements of what was the life and times of Harvey Milk, the documentary, and really putting a full narrative story to it. I think it's just a funny, heartfelt performance, and I cry. That is a sad movie. It is beautiful, touching, and really Penn deserved that win, I think.
Great. Thank you so much. Next, the majority of the panel is standing tall with 3 seed Daniel Day-Lewis 2012 winner for Lincoln, but Karissa is throwing it back by picking 2 seed James Stewart 1940 winner for The Philadelphia Story. Karissa, see if you can infiltrate our upper class coterie as you try to win some votes for Jimmy Stewart. Steve, be prepared to see our little nation through a civil war as you defend Day-Lewis for Lincoln. Karissa, please go first.
Jimmy Stewart is just very Tom Hanks, right? He's really lovely in all that he does. He's very much the everyman. He's really relatable. He makes you feel safe. He doesn't play up a lot. I don't love a lot of the stuff that he's been in, but I always love seeing him on my screen. And this was a year where he beat out a lot. So to win this award, he beat Charlie Chaplin in The Great Dictator, Henry Fonda in Grapes of Wrath, Raymond Massey in a movie called Abe Lincoln in Illinois. So he's already beat an Abe Lincoln.
Irony.
And Laurence Olivier in Rebecca. Like, that's a pretty
Oh,
strong
wow.
pool of actors, right? And so this is one of those, maybe he got the award from the Academy because they were making up for not giving it to him for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This is kind of the start, maybe, of
The makeup
cumulative
award.
credit awards. Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to have something different on the bracket. It's a romantic comedy, if you can believe that, and just from a different time and a different place. And I think it deserves a little bit of discussion.
I'm glad you did because it is different from pretty much anything else. Recency bias was alive and well with the poll for this episode. And so it's very heavy on the 90s, 2000s, and later victories. very few from the like first half of the 20th century, and there are wonderful performances in there. So thank you for talking about it. Steve, has she swayed you, or are you going to stick with Day-Lewis for Lincoln here?
No, I'm gonna stick with Day-Lewis for Lincoln because I really trashed him in the first time around, and
You did. You dragged him.
I think he's an excellent actor. I just didn't love that performance. And while Lincoln is not my favorite movie, and this was not the matchup was the hill that I was gonna die on, I do think that I really appreciated Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in Lincoln for bringing some parts to Lincoln that we don't really think of because he's such an icon in American history. We think we know so much about him, because he's Abraham Lincoln. But I thought that he gave the words I thought of were subtle, elegant, and poignant. The performance was very commanding, but not in a way that was bombastic. I will say this, the Academy seems to love bombastic performances when it comes to Best Actor sometimes. And I thought that this was one of those ones where, he was taking an iconic figure out of our history and giving us some context to the events that were surrounding the character. It shows him being the bold, compassionate leader that we think that he was, but also gives us sort of this like almost sly salesman side of him where he was trying to negotiate, this whole thing with bringing the southern states back into the Union, but not giving them a free ride coming back in. I thought that he did a good job with giving Lincoln some layers that were different than how we all think about Abraham Lincoln sometimes.
Kevin, did she sway you, or are you sticking with Lincoln here?
She may have swayed me because
Oh.
I love the Philadelphia Story. Because I love a movie about like romance gone wrong and finding yourselves back in each other's arms at different points in your life when you have grown and matured. Jimmy Stewart, I think, is the only comedic performance on this list, and it's very rare for an actor to win for a comedic performance.
Particularly an actor.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Rami Malek is the closest other thing I can think of.
Was that supposed to be comedic?
No, it sure wasn't. It sure wasn't. What Jimmy Stewart does in this reporter role is it could be seen as this like nothing performance, but he really captivates and is the narrator that drives these two really ultimately together. And it kind of capitalizes on some of the humor, and he like really is so propulsive and funny and charming, and something again that I think we're kind of lacking in this bracket. So I am going to switch to Jimmy Stewart.
Eric, I'm going to chime in here and actually say
Yeah.
again, this wasn't a hill I was going to die on. I love A Philadelphia Story. I think it's a great movie. I think Jimmy Stewart's excellent. I really just wanted to make sure people didn't yell at me too hard about Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will
respect.
Be Blood, but
Yep.
I actually think Jimmy Stewart's a fun person to put forward. I think he's going to have some trouble in the next round, but I want to give him his due, and I want to give this age of Hollywood its due, and put someone forward from this particular time.
I love this. This is the Lincoln assassination right here, folks. How is the show, Mrs. Lincoln?
Yeah.
Great. So we are, against all odds, moving the Philadelphia Story into round 2. Karissa Kloss, congratulations.
Wow.
John Wilkes Booth over here. All right, next it's Lovers versus Fighters, as the bulk of the panel is putting up its dukes for 4-seed Robert De Niro, 1980 winner for Raging Bull. But Carissa's blood runs cold at the thought of 1-seed Philip Seymour Hoffman, 2005 winner for Capote, going out in round 1. Kevin, get in the ring and score a TKO for De Niro. Carissa, swan about and see if you can influence someone to switch their vote to Hoffman. Carissa, please go first.
I was just floored at how transformed Philip Seymour Hoffman is in this role. Much like Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, he carries this whole film. There are barely any scenes that he is not in. Being a real person that there is real archival recordings of, so he is doing the voice and the posture and all of that, and he, unlike with Lincoln, like he actually has a lot more material to work with as a starting point. But man, it is so good. It is a character actor turned leading man, which is, an upstart story we all love. Very method, very true to the source material. This movie is so him. He is the title character. He is on screen the whole time, and he is just so good at making me forget who he was and just engaging in the story.
Interesting. Kevin, has she swayed you, or are you sticking with Raging Bull and De Niro?
I am sticking with Raging Bull. I've seen Truman Capote done so many times now at this point that it loses the flair and specialness. And I've seen it done really well by several people. I think Tom Hollander, I get people found him annoying. That's who Truman Capote was,
That's who he
ladies and
was.
gentlemen.
It's who he was.
I
Yep.
hate to break it to y'all. He was a drunk, belligerent homosexual.
And right here, Kevin.
I think that comes across in Capote too. He is, he's awful.
It's a little more reserved and quiet, and like it is a time in his life when he was more or less like that. So I don't begrudge him not doing that. I've seen Capote done so many times and well in various versions where I think for me, I'm moving Raging Bull forward because De Niro was essentially an author of that performance. He was the person who essentially had the rights to Jake LaMotta's life. He basically bullied Scorsese into doing that movie because Scorsese didn't want to do that movie because he was afraid of the violence. Shocking that some people don't realize that Scorsese doesn't necessarily need violence in his movies. I think a lot of people misunderstand what Scorsese and De Niro do with their characters. They think they glorify the violence and the hatred and the evilness of them, and it's the exact opposite. And I think that's why, for me, Raging Bull and De Niro are just like mind-blowingly some of the best work I've ever seen captured on film. That's my take. This is another hard battle. I will also say that. This was tough too, but for me, it's De Niro.
Steve, where are you on this one?
Yeah, I'm with Kevin. I think if Philip Seymour Hoffman had been up against some other people in this bracket, I probably would have picked him in Capote. But I think that Robert De Niro in Raging Bull is a real tour de force for the reasons Kevin said. So no, I'm staying with Robert De Niro.
I'm with Robert De Niro here, and Kevin's point that I have seen. We didn't even mention Toby Jones in.
Yeah, and he's great too.
He's great too, and was also nominated for it. And I think that's really the key here, Karissa, is that is a character that has been done so many times. And at the time when he won for this, I think he was the high watermark for Capote impersonations. And unfortunately, I think historically he's been superseded a couple times. Right, so we will be moving Mr. De Niro into round two. Finally, in round one, the majority of the panel thinks it's perfectly sane to move forward to see Jack Nicholson, 1975 winner for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, into round two over 3-seed Sidney Poitier, 1963 winner for Lilies of the Field. But Karissa wants to give Poitier his flowers.
Karissa, I feel like we're ganging up on you here.
I know.
Oh my God! In the best actor panel, we're ganging up on you. Oh no!
On the woman. We're making sure men are seen right now, right? Is that what's happening?
Great optics.
Karissa, oh my God.
Karissa, explain why Poitier should have a field day in round two. Steve, tell us why Nicholson is truly an acting institution. Karissa, please go first.
I hadn't seen this movie until I was doing the research for this, and technically it's supposed to be a comedy. It's about a migrant worker who stops, his car breaks down, and the closest thing is this like little farm of German nuns who escaped over the wall, and they feel like he's been delivered to them by God to build their chapel. And so he thinks he's going to get paid for the work he's doing around the place. And they have a huge language barrier, especially when they choose to have one, and try and keep him there longer to do the thing. It's kind of charming in its way. It's interesting to watch, two people from various different cultures try and make this work. This was also a play, so that you kind of get that feel. I learned when I was researching this that Sidney Poitier, there's a lot of them singing gospel hymns together. He was tone deaf, so they dubbed all of that. I know.
Really?
Yes, that is all
that's
dubbed.
crazy.
He was tone deaf.
Wow.
He was the first Black actor to win in a leading role, and only the second Black actor to win, period, after Hattie McDaniels won in a supporting role for Gone with the Wind. So that alone deserves a little bit. The other thing that's making me pick this film is that I hate One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, I really don't like that one. I really don't. So this was an easy pick for me, but I completely understand if it isn't for everybody else.
So, Steve, has she swayed you with her basically "I hate One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest" argument, or are
and
you
also,
going to
if you don't pick it, you're racist.
Yes, with those two arguments, has she swayed you, or are you sticking with Cuckoo and specifically with Mr. Nicholson?
I'm still with Jack Nicholson. And I will also say, I'm not a racist, but I actually do think that HUD should have won Best Actor for that year. But that doesn't make Sidney Poitier less deserving.
Sure.
You know, I thought that his performance was excellent. And again, these are subjective things that we're talking about. These are not, there's no objective way to do it. But I will say, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and particularly Jack Nicholson, really encapsulated a time in the late 1970s of, quote, like rebelliousness against the establishment. But I think he does it in a way that's both charismatic and compassionate. You know, he is both McMurphy as the over the top, charismatic guy, but he really cares about these other guys who are in this institution with him. And he comes across and he portrays that so well in this movie. I actually think it's one of Jack Nicholson's best performances, if not his best performance. His clashes with Nurse Ratched are just so electric. And he's defiant, but he's also subtle. He's showcasing his motivation to bring this sense of freedom to these guys who society has deemed, quote, crazy, for lack of a better way to put that. And I don't use that term pejoratively, but I thought that this movie, and there's a reason it won Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay, Best Director. Like, it was of a particular time. But I also think beyond being a snapshot of a time, it is timeless in the way that we still think about Jack Nicholson's performance in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, where I think that Lilies of the Field, people remember that Sidney Poitier won, and they remember that he was the first Black actor to win lead actor. And I do not diminish that in any way, shape, or form. But I would implore people to ask, have you seen Lilies of the Field? Or do you know what Lilies of the Field is? Or do you know anything about his performance? Karissa, you did an excellent job explaining it. But I just don't think that it is remembered in the way that McMurphy is in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Great
It's a
argument.
weird, it's a very
Yeah.
religious
Yeah, it
film.
is.
Yep.
Mhm.
Which made me
Of a
in
time,
these,
of a
yeah,
particular time.
in this day and time watching it, it
Yes.
feels like weird propaganda, but at the time,
Yes.
and
Well,
you
but I
know,
will also say,
yeah,
is this not from the same time that we had Around the Sound of Music? Like, were we just really into
probably.
nunneries at that point in time? Or, you know, like,
Possibly.
And then you
And
have the nuns.
Germans.
Yeah, and you have the nun story around this time too, I think.
And the
Yeah.
flying nun. Nuns were big business in the
Mhm.
1960s. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We were all in on nuns. Kevin, where are you on this one?
Well, Karissa, you'll maybe be surprised. Maybe you won't. I also don't like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest all that much. I think it is a fine movie. I really don't like Lilies of the Field, though, as a movie, marginally because of that religious propaganda, and I
Yeah.
really struggle with it. I think I wish Sidney Poitier won for, like, In the Heat of the Night, which he's like excellent
yes.
in. Like, if I could
100%.
rewrite history, give him that an
Mhm.
Oscar for that.
He didn't even do the gospel singing. They had to dub it, you know?
I
Like,
know, I
Crazy.
know. And then ultimately, like, this was for me, like,
But
maybe
yeah,
the
we
most.
gave an Oscar to Rami Malek for not singing anything. So, you know, hey, what are you
That's
gonna do?
true. Do you think the better performance and the more iconic, or one that in my rubric that I would push something for, would be Nicholson in Cuckoo's Nest, because people do reference the movie, and Steve, your argument there was what I actually thought as well.
Yeah, so for me, the historical significance of Poitier winning in 1963, huge. But my thing is, I don't particularly like Lilies of the Field. The whole time I was watching, in addition to the discomfort with the religious stuff, I was also like, so these white ladies just basically harangue this black man into doing all this work for free?
What?
I do think Nicholson in Cuckoo's Nest is genuinely a great performance. Even if you don't like the film,
Yep.
he's great in it. And so for that reason, I am going to move him into round 2. And that's the end of round 1, folks. We're going to take a quick break to see if Sasheen Littlefeather can host round 2 on my behalf. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hey there! If you're enjoying this episode of the Great Pop Culture Debate, and I sure hope you are, we would love for you to consider supporting the show on Patreon. Patreon sponsorships start at $5 a month and include loads of great perks, including access to our super active Discord server, exclusive episodes, and warm-ups you won't hear anywhere else. And at the $10 level or higher, your own GPCD tote bag, which is only fitting, as this is basically our version of an NPR pledge drive. We can only produce this show with your support, so please consider heading to patreon.com/greatpopculturedebate and joining us today.
And we are back for round 2 of our Best Actor Oscar winner debate. Before we get into the Elite Eight, I want our panelists to share their social media, what else they're working on, and also, if you feel like it, a performance in film from a lead actor this year being 2024, that you were particularly tickled by. We do not have the Oscar nominees out yet by the point we're recording this, but I'm curious if you have anyone that you'd like to put forward. Karissa, why don't you go first?
You can find me at Karissa Kloss on Instagram. You can also find me on our podcast oriented Discord where we talk about all the things. I am working on a little bit more podcast stuff and, that wardrobe of matching separates that producer Bob loves to hear about.
I love to hear about it too. So thank you so much, Kevin. First of all, performance from 2024, male leading, that you are really hyped about.
I'm going to go with 2 really quickly. Daniel Craig in Queer, which I think he's excellent in that movie. Really weird, interesting movie about being gay. Whoa, shocking. And then Jesse Plemons in Kinds of Kindness. That movie was peaks and valleys for me, but Jesse Plemons is timeless and amazing. And folks can find me on Blue Sky at Nightwing 223. I am still sometimes on Twitter because that's my angry space, and Blue Sky is my kind space. And you need your yin and yang, your positive and your negative, if I will. But at Twitter, I'm Et Kevin's Mind.
Great. Steve, our Patreon sponsor for this episode, thank you again for doing this. This is your 4th Patreon sponsored one. You can also listen to Steve on Best Actress, which is similarly full of great conversations about film. Best Emmy-winning series for drama, and Best TV Family. So go check those out. Steve, what's a 2024 lead actor performance that you're really jazzed about?
Yeah, I'm really jazzed about Jesse Eisenberg in A Real Pain. I think he's excellent in it. I think that Kieran Culkin has a real chance of winning supporting actor. I don't think Jesse Eisenberg has a chance of winning best actor. I think Adrian Brody's probably in the lead in that race right now. And then outside of best actor, I was talking about this a little before we started recording, but I think Ariana Grande's got a real chance of winning best supporting actress. I think she's a real showstopper in Wicked. I would encourage people to go see Wicked. It's quite good. As far as social media, I don't really do a lot of social media. I'm on Instagram at snikoloff, ESQ. But other than that, that's really my only social media stuff. I try to stay off the social media. It doesn't really do me much good sometimes.
It's probably for the best, especially in these days. You can find me at Great Pop Culture Debate on Insta, Threads, YouTube, or TikTok. Really, where we're focusing right now is on Blue Sky. You can find us at gpcd.bsky.social. We have a nice little following that's being cultivated over there, or at GPCD on Mastodon. But what you really need to do right now is to sign up for our weekly newsletter, which comes out every Tuesday at noon. It tells you about everything new in pop culture that week. Sign up by finding the link on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com or via our link tree on any of our social media accounts. Now, let's move into round 2 before Roberto Benigni arrives to crash the party. First up, it's 1 seed Anthony Hopkins from Silence of the Lambs up against 3 seed Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. I'm going to start with our Patreon sponsor, Steve. Where are you on this one?
Yeah, I'm still with Anthony Hopkins.
Okay. Karissa, are you with Hopkins or are you with There Will Be Blood?
I have a competition in me. I'm with Daniel Day-Lewis here.
Mr. Dillon, are you with Anthony Hopkins or are you with Daniel Day-Lewis?
Drink my milkshake, Eric. I'm with Daniel Day-Lewis.
This is a tough one. Again, I really enjoy both of these performances. Let's talk about Hopkins because we haven't really. As we alluded to early in the episode, he's not in the Silence of the Lambs much. I don't have the actual run time for it.
It's something like 11 minutes or 10 minutes. It's something ridiculous.
Yeah. However, let's say this. It is for the amount of screen time and then the overall cultural pervasiveness of a role, I don't know if there's any pound for pound representation in the history of film that is more potent than Anthony Hopkins in that movie. So many gifs, so many images. He's chilling in it. He's brilliant in it. Is it wrong to say that I actually kind of like Hannibal Lecter? I mean, our returning president loves him. He thinks he's a cool guy.
Oh, God.
I know.
You're not winning there, Eric.
I know. I do also understand the argument that it's 11 minutes versus, I mean, There Will Be Blood is approximately 9 hours long from my recollection of watching the movie.
God.
The most pleasant 9 hours of your life.
But Daniel Day-Lewis is excellent in it. And so I am torn. But I think the fact that it's 11 minutes versus 700 minutes of Daniel Day-Lewis.
180 probably. Let's be realistic, right? It
I
really
Yeah.
mean,
is
yeah.
though. He's in like every single scene.
And it's not just, I'm not a size queen. It's not just about the length. It is also a tremendously good performance, and it's very layered. Where I thought the performance got super interesting to me specifically, were the quiet moments where he wasn't saying anything and he was just communicating through his gestures and his eyes. But those moments where this very calm, subdued man would explode into rage. And I'm just going to be very candid. I loved watching him beat the shit out of Paul Dano in that
Oh
movie.
yeah.
I
Oh.
loved it. I was like,
Yeah.
hit her again, hit her again.
Hit Weezer, hit Weezer.
Seriously, that was great. And I was just like, he deserves every single one of these licks. And that to me almost became cartoonish. But I was also like, there's something really real about that, right? Like this normally very chill, buttoned up dude just fucking losing it was kind of weirdly comedic like it would be in real life. So I'm sorry, Steve. I think I'm giving it to Daniel Day-Lewis.
Can I just say one thing really
Yes.
quickly? And I think it's worth stating is we talk about screen time and we talk about best actor, and Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood is very good. I'm not going to deny that. I don't like it, but I'm not going to sit here and critically say that like I don't think it's a good performance. Anthony Hopkins owns every single minute he is on that screen. And while it is not a lot, as Kevin kind of said in the original thing that we were talking about, he is indelible. I mean, like you remember everything he says. You remember every nuance of what he says. He is owning every second of every word that he is saying in that movie. The fact that he was able to win an Oscar for whatever we're going to call it 11 minutes of screen time, I think is a real testament to his performance. He didn't need 2.5 hours of speeches to win. He won by giving the 11 or 8, I think it's 18 minutes of screen time that he has. And he owned every minute of those scenes when he's in that cage and he's talking to Clarice and you're mesmerized. Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, I think he's excellent, but man, I will just say this and I'm going to be done. Anthony Hopkins owns every minute of what he does in that movie.
So does Daniel Day-Lewis.
Disagree. Agree to disagree, Kevin. Like, again, this is not the hill I'm going to die on. Daniel Day-Lewis is one of our gifts of an actor. I wanted to make the point that, like, if you go only solely by the Silence of the Lambs, he owns every second of that movie.
Yeah.
You remember him like he was in a movie for 2 hours, even though he was in it for 18 minutes.
Totally agree. Totally agree. That being said, it is 3 for Daniel Day-Lewis, and he will move into the final 4. Next, the panel is split between 1C Gregory Peck from To Kill a Mockingbird and 2C Cillian Murphy from Oppenheimer. Kevin, plead your case for why Atticus Finch should make it to the final 4. Steve, become Death, Destroyer of Worlds, as you drop the bomb for Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer. Kevin, please go first.
We haven't talked about Gregory Peck yet, and I'm really excited because I think this performance, is representative of that quiet, calm, again, old school style of acting where you have Atticus Finch, who is the defense attorney for a black man who is accused of raping a white girl in town, and is both seen as a complicated figure and yet also a hero in some way, shape, or form. And he beat Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia, which is kind of wild and just shows you how powerful such a quiet, stunning performance is in To Kill a Mockingbird. I remember showing my sister when she was growing up To Kill a Mockingbird, really just as a good, like, I remember loving the book, I loved the movie, and I remember showing her that just to be like, this is what kindness looks like, or this is what kindness can represent. And this is, in some ways, a very simple way of demonstrating what this can and could look like. And it has its own whitewashed interpretation of kindness, but still wanted to emulate what and how we treat other people and what it means to stand up for people who don't have the power. And that is what Atticus Finch represents. You could call it a white savior movie, of course, but it actually deals with it in a nuanced way that a lot of even modern films are really bad at. And
Yeah.
I think what you see in Gregory Peck's performance, who I think was one of the greatest actors, I think he's just so incredible. And I just love To Kill a Mockingbird. I love his performance in it, always have. And it just represents kind of a lovely representation of what this category doesn't do all that often. Quiet, simple, but yet he's up against quiet as well. These are
He
two
is.
quiet performances, which is super interesting and exciting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, thank you for that, Kevin. Steve, he's right.
Uh,
Cillian Murphy is also very quiet in this role. Do you want to talk about it?
yeah, I was just gonna say, I was like, Kevin, you kind of made the same argument I would make about Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer, which is he is taking someone who we know did this tremendous good or bad thing and is playing it really quietly and is just doing his thing, and yet you're captivated by it. He draws you into a movie that feels like it moves at a clip even though it's as long as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, these understated performances are hard to gauge sometimes because they're not so bombastic, they're not so speech driven. I will also say, to go back to our Anthony Hopkins argument, is Atticus Finch is not the real protagonist of To Kill a Mockingbird. He's not the lead. His daughter is the lead of the movie. And so he comes in and he gives a great performance in those courtroom scenes, but yet at the same point in time, they are culminated mostly in the second half of the movie. He's not really in a lot of the first half of the movie as Jem and Scout and all of them are doing their thing, where Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer is the whole movie, the same way you guys argued with Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. And I'm not trying to lawyer you out of this argument. I'm saying, if I'm using that same argument
I don't
again,
know if that's accurate per se, Steve, but I'll give it to you.
Great. Karissa, are you with To Kill a Mockingbird, Gregory Peck, or Cillian Murphy and Oppenheimer?
For me, this is the matchup that I could care less about, honestly. I
Mm.
don't I like To Kill a Mockingbird on rewatching the movie, which was election night, which might be, please take that into account when you
Oh,
hear my
yeah.
interpretation. The kids were so annoying. The
They
kids
are
were
annoying.
they
so
are really
loud.
annoying.
Like, this needs to be remastered, like audibly, because the kids are just like shrill and loud, and I was a little bit on edge. And Gregory Peck is the calm, staying reprieve of all of that, and I was so grateful when he was on the screen. And this is a very nuanced and very quiet performance. Oppenheimer doesn't do it for me. It doesn't. I've seen it
Thank
twice.
you. Thank you.
I was the Barbie girl anyway, but even if they hadn't been in direct competition, like, I don't know. And I love Cillian Murphy. Liked him in a lot of earlier stuff, like The Jawline always did it for me. I don't know. I guess I'm gonna go with Gregory Peck here, just for like getting some black and white a little further in the bracket.
I am with Oppenheimer. I actually do really like Oppenheimer, and I saw it late. I saw it fairly recently, actually, for this bracket, and I had been avoiding it because I was like, ugh, I really don't want to watch a 3 hour plus movie about another, sad white man. But it was actually so much more than that, and I thought that Cillian Murphy completely lived up to the hype in it. I thought that was the performance of a lifetime, and that's part of my rubrics, right? Like, is this a
Mm.
defining performance for this actor? And without question, and you could say the same thing for
I
Gregory
was going to
Peck and
say,
To Kill a
Mhm.
Mockingbird, sure. But like, I don't think that Cillian Murphy, who I hope will have a nice long career after this, is going to give us a better performance than what he gave us in this movie. It is everything. It's quiet, it's subdued, it's restrained, but you feel what he's feeling. And what that man was feeling is something that literally I don't think pretty much anyone else on the planet has ever felt. The amount of responsibility was palpable. I got anxiety watching him in this movie. That's powerful acting for me. So
I,
we are. Go
I got
ahead, Kevin.
anxiety from the film bros on Twitter about this movie.
I
So
could
that's
see
my
that.
anti-vote on that.
I
I
could
just
see
wanted
that.
more Florence Pugh. I mean,
Sure. Who doesn't?
I did too. Look, give me
Mhm.
more Florence Pugh in anything you want to give it to me in. I mean,
Truly,
honestly.
truly.
Agreed. But with that being said, we're split 2-2. And in a Patreon sponsored episode, we do not go to seeds. We go to the tiebreakers. And Steve, as our Patreon sponsor, you get the first tiebreaker. Who's it going to?
It's going to Cillian Murphy. I hear what you guys are saying about Oppenheimer, but I think that your opinions are a little more about the film as opposed to Cillian Murphy's performance in the film. And
Totally.
I can understand that, but I think his performance in the film is incredible.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we will move Cillian Murphy from Oppenheimer into the final four. Next, it's another unanimous victory for 4-seed F. Murray Abraham and Amadeus, who I believe has played out 2-seed James Stewart in the Philadelphia Story. We talked about the Philadelphia Story quite a bit in the previous round. We've literally not talked about Amadeus and F. Murray Abraham at all.
I think we're going to get to him.
Okay, we'll hold on to final
It's
four for
great.
this.
It deserves to be here.
It's-
We're not
yeah.
Ursula. This is not the pizza pepperoni argument at all.
No,
He deserves to be where he is.
the patron saint of pettiness. Finally, in round two, I believe it's one more unanimous decision, this time for 4-seed Robert De Niro in Raging Bull, who is knocking out 2-seed Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So with that, we have our final four. We're going to take a quick break to discuss how unbelievably fucked up it was that Adrian Brody literally sexually assaulted Halle Berry upon winning in 2002. And we just kind of went along with it. We'll be right back after these messages.
Another email newsletter? God, I know. But listen, the Great Pop Culture Debate newsletter, it's actually useful. Give us 3 minutes of your lunch break, and we'll tell you all the coolest new stuff in pop culture that week. The biggest new movies in theaters, the hottest new albums about to drop, the TV shows everyone will be talking about. We bring it to you every ball. It's all thriller and no filler, and you'll also find out all the fun news from the podcast. Subscribe today at greatpopculturedebate.com/subscribe.
And we are back with the final four of our Best Actor Oscar winner debate. At this point in the show, I always like to take a step back and see if it shook out the way I expected it to. I also like to add at this point that no matter which option wins, we are celebrating all of these entries, and I hope nobody gets salty about what comes next. So we have a final four of Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood versus Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer, F. Murray Abraham and Amadeus versus Robert De Niro in Raging Bull. This is not the final four that I was expecting, and I don't think it's the final four that the seeds would have dictated either. Do we have any 1-seeds in here?
I don't think
we do.
That's what
Maybe
you should
not.
expect from the three of us.
That is true. That is true.
That's good,
I have
actually.
two of these in my final four, but two I do not.
Steve, as our Patreon sponsor, how many of these were in your final four?
Good question. Let me see. Real quick.
I have
Oh.
three. I have three.
I have three.
Okay. Great.
Oh, wow.
So let's jump into this, and we're going to go around the horn. It's Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood versus Cillian Murphy and Oppenheimer. Kevin, where are you going on this one?
Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood, because I love it.
Karissa.
Drainage. I'm with Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood.
And Steve, I have a sense where you're going on this one.
I think I'm going to buck that trend because I actually think Daniel Day-Lewis is the better performance
Really?
of these two.
Kidding.
I hate it, but I respect it.
Oh,
Okay.
Steve, look at that.
We love
We're-
this.
A surprise change between this and Jimmy Stewart. I'm loving the plot twists in this episode. It's an M. Night Shyamalan joint. I will give one vote to Cillian Murphy. I really did think it was an excellent performance. I don't want it getting out without 0 votes, but these are both very strong performances. And I think in terms of 21st century nominees, I would consider these to be the 2 best 21st century Best Actor wins thus far, in my opinion.
I would
And you
agree.
can-
I would agree with that.
I
You
don't
can
know what I
scratch your
would
head on that
where
one.
I'd
In the
quibble,
21st
yeah.
century?
21st century.
Yeah, I think that's probably
Yeah.
right.
I think
Yeah.
you're right. I think you're right.
Now let's take it back to the 20th century, or as my nephew and niece like to call it, the 1900s, and talk about 2 1980s wins, F. Murray Abraham in Amadeus and Robert De Niro in Raging Bull. I'm going to start in the back of the pack with Steve. Steve, we have not yet talked about Amadeus. We have not yet talked about F. Murray Abraham.
I mean, what to say about Salieri? I mean, my God, if he is not the soul animal of the great pop culture debate, I don't know who is really.
Yep.
Like, we're talking about a guy who was so jealous of his protege that he basically sabotaged him in a way. But yet, at the same point in time, F. Murray Abraham does this with the depth of I don't even know what. He's so compelling. And the fact that they keep going back and forth between him after Mozart's death and during the time that they were, I guess, what you would call like against each other, even though Mozart didn't really understand that. And I give a lot of credit to Tom Hulce in this movie too, because he really does flesh out the performance of Salieri. And I don't think he does a better job than F. Murray Abraham, but I think that dynamic between those two performers really elevates F. Murray Abraham's performance. It's just one of those things where, like, the true villain of the movie becomes someone who you actually are able to understand where he came from because he's explaining it to you. And that to me is a phenomenal way to do a performance. I'm going to let someone else talk too, because I think we all kind of picked F. Murray Abraham, and I want to let someone else chime in as well.
You pointed out something that I think about every time I think about this performance, which is we should hate Salieri because he really is a kind of a despicable shit. And yet, at no point in watching that movie did I hate Salieri. It was like, I see where you're coming from, girl.
You
Like,
almost feel bad for him, like in a weird way.
Yeah, it's kind of like Lucy in the football, right? Like
Yeah.
he's trying his hardest, and god damn it, he can't. And meanwhile, Mozart is really fucking annoying. Like he is.
Awful.
He's so annoying.
But that
he's
is actually a testament to Tom Hulce's performance, because he's
Yes.
doing a good job
Yeah.
in being someone that we don't want Salieri to like.
Yes, so good. Karissa, where are you on this one? Is it F. Murray Abraham or is it Robert De Niro?
I'm with F. Murray Abraham here. I've seen Amadeus a handful of times at various different points in my life, and this film always hits in some way. And F. Murray Abraham he carries it. He carries it so much, so that he's my go here.
Kevin, where are you on this one?
I think it's wild that the two movies on this side of the bracket are in the 80s, which I think is one of the worst decades for the Oscars. But these are the two best actor performances from that decade, like hands down in my opinion. I'll say this: I hate music biopics. I think they are outright dreck garbage. With that said, this movie is, I think, the absolute blueprint for how you do the music biopic. I think Amadeus is great, and I think F. Murray Abraham is one of those character actors who turned out a fucking great performance and really is so iconic in this role. Like, it's a really great performance.
Such as Philip Seymour Hoffman and Capote.
Yes. But tell me about anyone else who's played Salieri better than F. Murray Abraham.
Exactly.
So true.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
true.
So I'm F. Murray Abraham as well.
They didn't have mics back in Mozart's day, but if they did, that would have been a mic drop. I'm also going to give it to the esteemed Mr. Abraham as well. Nothing against Robert De Niro and Raging Bull. It is, but here's one other thing. It is among the jewels in a crown of a career. This is F. Murray Abraham's real shining moment, and that shouldn't matter one way or the other. I'm just making the point that, like, again, roles that define an actor's career, this is a definitive role for F. Murray Abraham without question. So we have a final two of Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood versus F. Murray Abraham in Amadeus. Interesting in that it is two people who are arguably the villains of their movies, but yet are sympathetic, or at least you can't hate them. I would like
And
to
this is why Best Actor is different than Best Actress.
Yes. And we haven't talked about this, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the warm-up, is that I'm generally speaking much more interested in the work that women are doing in film than I am in the men, because a lot of it's male pain, which is kill me now. But you're right, Steve. Tell me a villain who wins an Oscar besides Network, right? Where you had
Faye Dunaway.
Faye Dunaway, thank you. You don't give villains Oscars if they're women, right?
The only other one I can think of. The only other one I can think of is Charlize Theron in Monster.
No, it's Nurse Ratched too.
And Nurse Ratched.
Nurse Ratched too. Okay.
It's Louise Fletcher.
Yeah.
But that was the 70s and everyone was a villain.
That's right.
But I think that's a great point. I do want to start with Kevin. Where are you on this one? Is it going to be Daniel Day-Lewis? Is it going to be F. Murray Abraham?
This is my final two that I had going into this. And what I will say about this is, so during the pandemic, I did a year-by-year movie watch because I was unemployed. And I took the first year to be 2007. It's a terrible year to pick during the beginning of the pandemic because it is one of the bleakest years, because it is a response to the Bush era, essentially. And what I will say about Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood and that movie is that is the film, while it is set in the 1920s, but it is a mirror image of where we ended up in the early 2000s, and boy, does that movie literally take the cartoonish villains of the Bush era administration and what they were trying to sell us and essentially giving us this horseshit sales pitch of why we invaded a country, why we were doing terrible things to the environment, why we were preventing gay people from getting married. And like they were selling us this shit and they were winning.
Is Daniel Plainview Dick Cheney?
In a way, yes. And it is a much better biopic than Vice. Thank you, Christian Bale. It's just very fascinating to see Paul Thomas Anderson tackle that with the humor and the drive that he does in his script to get Daniel Day, or not even to get, because Daniel Day-Lewis she's driving the car in that acting. He method acting, like playing this overtly terrible, both humorless and humorful human being is so why he is, I think, our best actor working and why he has 3 Oscars. And I think it is his best performance. It's one that people quote. It represents the era that it is of its time. And it is a timeless performance that I think it's the best win in the category ever.
Karissa, where are you? Is it going to be Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood or F. Murray Abraham and Amadeus?
Love both of these, and I think it's really interesting that both of these films have 2 very strong male characters playing off of each other. And you need the Paul Dano for the Daniel Plainview. Like, you need the Mozart to Salieri, right? But I'm with There Will Be Blood here. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is one of our great working directors. I think what he and Daniel Day-Lewis did together in this film is absolute magic. It is one of my favorite films I've ever seen. I've seen it a lot of times. And we talk about the character as being very like cold and distanced and all of that, but there is that whole section where he thinks he's found his long lost brother who shows up, and he's so hopeful. He really wants this to be his brother, and he keeps sort of like pushing, little things from back home. And once he realizes this is someone who's stolen his brother's identity and it isn't actually, then he closes himself all the way off. But there's something in that character. There's a little bit of vulnerability there that is played so well, and it's so hopeful, and it's so sad when that gets shut down. And Daniel Day-Lewis all the way for me. This is my hill to die on.
And all the stuff with his son too, which I think is in that movie.
Sweet
It's both
face to
terrible.
Byland.
Yeah, there's parts of it that are really kind of hopeful and then just absolutely crushingly brutal. Steve, you're our Patreon sponsor for this episode. Where are you on this?
Hate There Will Be Blood. But I will say this. Daniel Day-Lewis has won 3 Best Actor Oscars. And they are all great wins. And I will also say that I respect the performance in There Will Be Blood, even though I don't like it. Like, I can understand objectively why it's a good performance. And there is a reason the Academy keeps acknowledging him over and over and over again. And you know why? Because I agree with Kevin. I think he's the best actor of our current time. And so while I am very, very much in the table for Salieri, F. Murray Abraham gave a great performance in Amadeus. But 1 performance versus 3 performances is a really hard rubric to overcome.
Totally.
And so I would say that I think it has to go to Daniel Day-Lewis. Who else do you give it to? It's Daniel Day-Lewis. He's our Best Actor Oscar winner of this bracket.
Yeah, and one thing we didn't talk about is all those wins he had, those were very different performances.
Incredibly.
He transforms himself.
My left foot is like completely off.
Completely different.
And incredibly competitive categories in those years.
Yeah. It's not, and I'm not going to say he's a chameleon because I still see Daniel Day-Lewis as an actor in these roles, but the way he is able to disappear in terms of the emotions and the actions of the character is a kind of magic, and I don't think anyone else is touching him in that ability, in my opinion, in the current working actor. So I'm gonna make it a clean sweep, and there you have it. Our pick for the best actor Oscar winner is Daniel Day-Lewis. Do you agree? Do you think we pulled a La La Land and read the wrong name from the envelope? Tell us how you really feel by leaving a comment on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com, or find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, or Mastodon. While you're there, make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you can hear about what new debates are coming soon, vote in open polls, and even decide which topics we tackle next. I want to say thank you to my panel. Thank you especially to our Patreon sponsor, Steve Nikoloff. We're so grateful for your continued support, and it's such a delight to have you on. So thank you so much for joining us, Steve. It's been great.
No, thank you.
We like you. We really like you.
We really like you.
Yes.
Thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get even more exclusive content and you get episodes a whole day early. We hope you have a good one, and remember, everyone is entitled to their wrong opinion. Now I'm going to go enjoy some fava beans and a nice Chianti.